I've loved everything I've seen from Xenoblade from the entire series so far. Even from X, we had some awesome stuff from X, and even going to do some Xenosaga eventually, and Xenogears. So looking forward to it. I've heard this is pretty good, but I have no clue really what kind of piece it is. Mechanical Rhythm title makes me sort of assume it's going to be potentially leaning to the rock instrumentation. It literally has the word rhythm in the title, so I'm going to predict it's going to be a little more rhythmic. But who knows? I mean, I've been really surprised by some Xenoblade tracks already in terms of just what I would guess they are versus what they end up being. Either way, not too important. What really matters is what it sounds like. And just going to jump kind of right into it. A little less of an intro today. And yeah, we'll see how long it takes for me to stop and talk about it forever. See how many seconds I get into it before we have to stop. You know me. All right, but let's check it out. God damn. All right. We're making it 9 seconds. I was trying to make it 10. All right, now let's talk. Let's talk about this. Don't worry, there's not too much necessarily for me to have to analyze here. But just first impressions, I did not expect we were gonna get a Doom track. Like, this is like reminding me more of, Doom 2016 than it reminds me of the typical rock instrumentation on a JRPG soundtrack. Like, that is a very satisfying riff to start. Like, I quite like some sort of prog rock and prog metal myself, and really do like a super satisfying guitar riff as the core of a song. Some bands I really like are really good at that. So it's something I love, and what a fantastic one to start off with. I hope it builds the core of the rest of the piece rather than just being a little taste of the style in the intro. But man, it actually gets pretty thick immediately. And right away, it just sounds... We all know that JRPGs oftentimes have, especially in battle music or field music, this rock, sometimes rock orchestration, like a combination of a classical orchestration plus a rock band, which is really cool. And I've talked before about how that unique combination shows up so often in JRPGs, but very rarely outside of that, despite how well it works. But a lot of times that space, even it can sometimes approach being pretty metal, and there can be a lot of solos all over the place, it's usually still a little on the thin side, I would say. Sometimes that's a limitation of the hardware and the technology and the audio fidelity. Sometimes it's a limitation of being more of a MIDI recording. And honestly, that's probably the most common reason, is just the quality of the recording and the ability to play it back and being able to record with live instruments or not and make those sound really good and have the kind of production that makes them sound meaty and satisfying on a great rock or metal record. For example, that kind of stuff on the Final Fantasy Remake trilogy is excellent because it's all beautifully recorded and arranged and performed live, and it hits really hard. But most games in the past, especially JRPGs that tend to use this approach to composition and have these rock elements, tend to also be ones that usually don't get the chance to be recorded in this way. Games that tend to have the budget and the soundtrack composition approach to be recorded live with that kind of production quality tend to be more in the realm of film and TV scores. There's a pipeline for hiring and working with a sort of session orchestra oftentimes that is prepared to work with those sorts of pieces and to get it recorded and to get it sounding good. Otherwise, you're probably working with digital workstations, which can sound incredible as well, and sometimes you really can hardly tell the difference most of the time when listening to it. But those are less often, video games with orchestration plus rock instruments, so you just don't get a big, meaty, satisfying sound the way you would off of an actual band playing this genre of music, recorded live and mixed and produced by someone who knows how to make that sound good. Which is why, even in just the first, 9-10 seconds of something like this, it already makes an association with things that are less common to me, like the Doom, the modern Doom soundtracks, or the FF7 remake trilogy, where they stand out for really making those rock and metal elements sound great recorded and sound closer to what you would expect from a good actual band playing this kind of music that you don't usually get to hear on game soundtracks. So I love hearing that. Again, it stands out in this field, and who knows, maybe it pulls it back and it just goes really hard on that intro. But it jumps out of the gate with an awesome riff. It ramps up the thickness of the instrumentation. It just sounds really meaty right away, and I hope it just leans into that for the rest of it. Clearly established a super fast tempo, and yeah, I'm curious if it's going to transition back to something else or if that's just going to keep building. But back to the start. Little harmonic. Yeah, they do repeat this this riff pattern, and hopefully, again, it serves kind of the basis for it. Let me back up, catch the transition into the first main section, but they have that little screech, little harmonic in the middle of the pattern that seems to come in each time, which is great. It's really distinctive. Yeah, just that fast drum pattern, fast rhythm. Nice. Okay, we go a little halftime. Clearly, we're introducing this symphonic rock element. By this point, we're bringing in these strings melodies that I've always really liked this combination. There's some bands, for example, that have slower paced vocals that go with harder rock instrumentation for the rest of the band. I always like that contrast because you have a melody moving at a slower pace for you to follow along with, while the other parts of the music are going really fast, are much more intense and taking more of the rhythmic interest, but you can still pay attention to that sort of main melody in a way that kind of ties it together over a longer arch. I always think that works really well, and that's what they're doing here with the sort of strings melodies coming in. It's hard to say if they're necessarily completely meant to be heard as the forefront of the music, but to me, I kind of hear them that way because they stand out as being the outlier, and they're pretty clear, so it makes sort of this smoother, slower paced, arched out sort of main melody that contrasts the rest going on and gives you something, again, to sort of anchor to while so much else is going on. And I really appreciate that. So it does bring us back in the realm of JRPG symphonic rock music. And yeah, and I just really like the sort of repeated riff shape in the guitars that I think would be, I could take a moment to work it out on the keys here or on the piano back there, but again, I don't think anybody's necessarily too interested in that. We can all hear it. It's really sick, but it's a very satisfying pattern. It would make it really nice to make like an actual transcription of this piece because it would give you a nice kind of left hand to work with that is both regular but also still interesting, and that's always a good structure to build like say a piano arrangement of a piece on. Maybe people have already done that and done a great job with like a piano transcription. Anyways, gonna go back and see what these strings melodies are again, focus on them a little more and enjoy them, and see if I can follow along the melodies they choose there forward into the piece. Yeah, we slow it down, start chugging a little more. Yeah, so there until 40 seconds, we get that slowed, kind of halftime, I guess, section. I don't know all the terminology for rock bands quite as much, but you might call it that. Where we get a little bit more sync, we get, instead of the strings doing their own melody that contrasts the rest of the stuff going on, we both slow it down, and we get the strings and guitars actually doing a lot of parallel, working as a unit on the same notes. So again, we're getting contrast not just in speed, but we're getting a contrast in how the instruments are used. So it helps it to immediately feel like a very different section right away. Yeah, and we go from this strings melody that kind of climbs up. It's very just kind of an upward stepping up in the prior section to just using them completely differently here. More rhythmically again. As I said, they're aligned more with the way that the rock instruments are being used in this section. Despite slowing everything down, now things are being used more in a unified way, rather than creating the contrast in how one section is used against the other, which is great. When you have the different sections in a piece, I find it really enjoyable when they use a few different tricks that help subtly differentiate themselves so that it still feels like a cohesive piece like this does, but also feels like you've gone from one thing to another very clearly. It makes it feel both like you're still listening to the same piece and yet very much not at the same time. And I always find that that's more pleasurable than feeling like you've completely shifted into an entirely different piece, although it has its time and place and can be very interesting, or that you've changed sections, but you can't really tell that too much is different. It's not maybe differentiated enough. So this is kind of the sweet spot. And gonna back up and get the transition into the next part. Back into the strings-led section, very classic JRPG. Yes. Oh, that sounded so sick. I think that's with what, the kick drums on every note, or the bass kick. Kind of sounds like it. I think it's like doing a double kick throughout that, which really makes it just hit a lot heavier. Just accentuates every single one of those. If you played those notes without the extra accentuation, without that extra, kind of deep rumble to it, it just wouldn't sound the same. Really, it just sounds sick. It sounds fantastic. But yeah, we get this section again with just heightened focus on this kind of fun, expansive strings melody with this energy that is very classic melody seen in other sections of the soundtrack. Not literally the same one, but very classic style of it that I've already seen other pieces I've looked at. So it kind of makes it all of a sudden sound very Xenoblade. And it might even be a shared melody with some of the other pieces that I think people pointed out. There are some pieces that have a connection to mechanical rhythm, and it's possible they do actually share these melodies as well. But yeah, I don't know necessarily what the association is between them, if it's melodic or if there's other things, other elements of the music. But let's continue. Yeah. Oh. Damn, they really just keep the rhythm just driving. It's not the loudest in the drums in the background, unlike this section, but you can still hear it kind of going nonstop. Yeah, you can hear these kind of, not super loud, but you can kind of hear these kicks as a constant stream with the cymbals a little less frequent, but it does have this constant fast rhythm that they're not making it completely in your face, but it's still there, enough to make it sound still quite fast-paced and hectic. But they're really into the chugging on this, and I'm super into that as well. Like, again, it's just not a thing you normally get to hear too much on game soundtracks, because it oftentimes just doesn't sound that great if you're just doing like a MIDI, if you're only able to do more of a MIDI approach, or not able to have a real recording of the instruments. It doesn't necessarily play that well, I think. Harder to mix and produce in a satisfying way. But when you're able to work with it like this, like just leaning into all this chugginess, like from section to section in different ways, like they're leaning on that pretty hard, and I think that's perfect because it's not something you hear that much. it might get old if you heard it all the time across all kinds of soundtracks or on the same soundtrack, but you just really don't. So it stays kind of fresh in a game context and just sounds kind of sick, to be honest. And then we go back to that main guitar riff from the beginning. Ooh, that was gorgeous. What was that? I don't even know how I would describe that, but just a little screechy, kind of juicy sequence of those two chords they're used in that way in this little transitional moment. Like, oh man, what a great little accent there. Like, it just sounds so unique. I love like sort of unique timbre to something. I've never quite heard exactly that kind of sound. It just sounded awesome. A little bit of wind effects for the drama. Some extra little melodies. Chugging with a bit more strings counter melodies. Even more. Yeah, they really did more with that section than last time we heard it, I think. Fucking awesome solo. Damn, that was so good. That was so good. All right, okay, so about 225, we're down, we're pulling back a bit, but I want to go back to the start of this whole guitar solo section. From the beginning of this solo, we had sort of a, almost like a duet kind of feel between the strings melody being very much in the forefront and also getting this guitar solo separating itself from the pack. So we had a lot of interplay that you would have in duet writing rather than just everything become support for the solo. And I forget if the strings melody kind of fell back and let the guitar solo take over when it really started to fly, or if they kept kind of duetting the whole time. But I did think that was cool because they're having to write, kind of counterpoint between these two very prominent melodies at the same time with the strings and the guitar. But what a sick solo. That was just so satisfying. I mean, every guitar solo I've heard on the soundtrack has been kind of disgustingly good, but it's just beautiful. Just what a perfect little solo. Like, it's flashy just enough. It's not super extreme, but it's exciting. It's melodically satisfying. It really sings, and I think it's just long enough. Just would love to hear this again. I think it might have been around 140. Now a little later. It's so disgustingly good. I love the little turns, little noodling on the way down, and then again more ornaments on the arpeggiation upwards, but in different ways. The way it descends in a kind of flashy manner is totally different from the way it ascends right afterwards. And just cool. It really brings your ear along to hear the sort of the fanciness of the approach in a solo like this, that you hear it descending and you hear it do one thing and then it starts to climb and you hear it do it in a different way. I really like having it thought out in that manner for a directionality to go along with, it's almost like you're cutting the sections of the writing in this solo to, well, what are the qualities being shown during the descent, and then considering the ascent to be a different part and using different techniques there. I really like that in piano writing as well, when you kind of separate things you separate sections of music in different ways than you would maybe normally, not just by purely by thematic content or by instrumentation or separating by, measures or bars or rhythmic shifts, but sometimes you can differentiate one section to another and then mix up the qualities of them based on things just like, is the motion downwards or upwards? And it's just an example of something going on here that I think makes it easier to latch onto and really enjoy what's happening. At least I really like it. Yeah, like the little descent with the noodling down with some turns. You wouldn't call them exactly trills because they're kind of turning around certain notes as they go down. Common shape on a piano as well, but does it through a few octaves coming down here, and then it climbs differently. And then more scalar going upwards. The going upwards has less of the has less ornamentation, would say, but it's more climbing as a scale and then jumping back a little bit and climbing again and jumping back and climbing again. Another thing I like to do on the piano. So it's less ornamental going up, but it's more exciting because it actually traverses more ground. It gets to those high screeches and just really sings. It's so good. And listen to the end of it again and then get on to this next quieter section. See what's going on there. Drops out instantly, no real transition. Little clean guitar sounds. Still got those kick drums. Little subtle bass sounds. Or bring back to the original guitar riff. So as always, we're at about exactly halfway, and it seems like it's looping. Kind of never know. There's some pieces where, like this one, there's some versions you can see on YouTube that are exactly half the length and some that are double the length, but then not sure if the version of the track makes it that some of them don't actually loop. They're twice as long, but they're actually arranged differently in the second half. So I'm going to peek around and just check if this is fully looping because... don't want to accidentally talk for ages about the same stuff that we've already talked about, just because that could be wasting everybody's time. But let me see exactly what this first section sounds like. That happened in the beginning and I didn't even notice. Or maybe I did talk about them before. I think it might not loop. I feel like that was a little different. Yeah, I think instead of those two kind of little screechy chords, it just did a bit more arpeggiation. Yeah, I think it is different. So I'm actually going to listen through it on the back half, and it might be mostly the same, but I'm just going to listen for things I didn't hear the first time, or just enjoy it. And if there's anything I want to talk about it, I will, but otherwise I'll just kind of enjoy it and assume that it's not quite a full loop. We'll see if we get like the whole same guitar solo and everything, which I'm happy to listen to again, of course. an odd little sound effect there, like a little kind of technological. Yeah, what is that? Interesting. What is this little sound effect here in the right ear? Yeah, right there at like 322. Actually, right when it turns to 323. What is that? It's like right here. Little beep or little screech kind of. It's interesting. That felt a little different. Man, just those non-stop kicks. I remember that from before. I love how that little string melody has a little turn in it that reminds me of the guitar solo. There's that little sound effect again. I wonder if it was in the first half and I didn't notice. Same solo, just as good the second time. Yeah, I really can't tell. I feel like the second half is essentially a loop, but that there's a few different points where I think something different's happening. I couldn't really tell for sure going back and forth. This might be even like the second loop point. I'll listen through to the end and then talk about it. You know, I love this, we hear it every time, but that kind of do-do-do that it does right there, actually, you know, it sounds very much like some symphonic kind of woodwind instruments. Like, I don't think you really hear those obviously in any other part of this arrangement except right there, just in that little intermediary little background counter melody of like don't. What even notes are those? Just this little sort of C sharp D natural that they come in with. Like, it's like so much more sort of classically instrumentalization. What even is the word there? Like a sudden moment of like more classical like symphonic orchestration, just with those kind of woodwinds out of nowhere, just right at that moment. And it's funny that it's like they're not clearly brought in from what I noticed anywhere else. If they are, they're definitely like in the mix of everything else, but they just kind of get to be right at the forefront right at that moment. It's sort of quirky. Because it's definitely not, you know, the strings doing it there, and they just kind of get to come in and say hi there just for a moment, be like, hey, the woodwinds are here too. Like we're here. You might not have heard us until now, but we get a little moment of our own to just go. Anyways, let's switch over to playlists and give some thoughts. Talk about where to put this. Anyways, so yeah, I mean, that was as good as I've come to expect from Xenoblade. It really got the opportunity to get, chuggier and thicker than you usually get to hear, thanks to the quality of the production and the instrumental recording that, gets to happen on an OST like this definitive edition soundtrack. And love hearing that because you don't get to hear it all the time. I also think that it's hard to tell where the loop points are sometimes on songs like this. I tried to go back and forth a little bit, and I couldn't quite tell if the back half of this particular video posting of it was a loop from the beginning or not. It seemed like there were maybe some differences, which definitely could be the case, that it essentially repeats, but there are a few tweaks here and there to change it up. But for the most part, it's the same sections again, in which case it's a minor difference between a full loop, but it's worth, seeing which parts are different. Or it's possible that it really does loop there, and then again for the last 20 seconds or so it loops again. But I don't know, it's hard to say. It's definitely mostly the same, but sometimes I'm not sure, and it might be a unique thing with the way the pieces are posted onto YouTube for these different OSTs. For example, Xenoblade Chronicles 1. I think every game sometimes has a bit of a format which some people post the OST in, or maybe just that it exists on the actual official produced and sold soundtrack. So yeah, I'm not really sure what's going on there. It's not really that important, other than I'm not always sure if I should stop at, for example, about 2 minutes, 45 seconds into checking out this piece and, giving my reactions and thoughts and talking about it a bunch. If it makes more sense sometimes to stop there and consider that having looked at the full thing, and maybe not be as boring or something for looking at the same thing again. It might not be as interesting, or I might, over focus on looking at what's different, or if it is a loop, which is also not very interesting. I'd rather keep it to a first impression of reacting to it and having some thoughts and analysis on it. I think that's more fun. But sometimes I'm not sure, and if there are things that are different, then I don't want to be cutting things short halfway through and not enjoying everything that's composed for one of these pieces. Definitely want to seem as if I'm going through it fully. So yeah, I don't know if you can give me some thoughts on that, if you definitely get the impression that these are typically looped and played twice, or if there's enough of a difference for it to be worth going through all of it. Or if you prefer it one way or the other, because I'm kind of happy to do either. I just don't want to make the videos drag on to way longer than they need to be, or to have a lot of listening without much to talk about. If I feel like I've given my thoughts on the initial part when it's mostly the same afterwards. But anyways, just rambling a little bit. As for the playlist, obviously it's a great track, and it's not in the jazzier section, although even the jazzier Xenoblade stuff didn't, I still didn't put that in this new generally jazzy silly section, because these are not as intense orchestrated pieces. I think it's still gonna be in orchestrated energy, but it's kind of hard to say. I almost feel like it should have a little bit of its own section, because a lot of these have the sort of symphonic rock approach to them, but I do feel like I would rather have a differentiation for ones that are primarily symphonic versus primarily rock or metal. Not sure. For now, I'm just going to list it in this section with the others here. And stick it there. I think that works. Because I think if I were to separate out into more of a an orchestrated energy playlist that has more of a rock focus rather than the symphonic focus, I think I would probably have to go back and change some of these other tracks, probably one or two. And I don't really remember which ones I would shift. So for now, I think it can go in the same section. once again, this is the Xenoblade playlist for now, but I think that it's going to expand eventually with stuff from different games. Same as this is kind of the Fire Emblem 4 playlist, but I think it will also gain a lot more as I look at some more kind of classic games. Yeah, hope you enjoyed this reaction. I look forward to doing more Xenoblade. Hopefully something was interesting here or enjoyable, and yeah, I have lots of great suggestions for Xenoblade to work with, and feel free to comment and sort of vote for what you'd like to see. I've definitely gotten suggestions for mini pieces, but the more people want certain ones, definitely the sooner I'll check them out. So still worth letting me know what you're interested in. And at some point I might sort of publish what my actual suggestion list is and like what's maybe coming up next. But for now, thank you for watching, and I will see you in next videos. Peace.